A cheap house in Texas can look like a rare opportunity, especially for someone moving from a state where housing has become so expensive that even a normal, quiet life now costs too much. But a low price does not always mean a town was simply overlooked, because sometimes it comes with a weak job market, empty storefronts, aging roads, industry near residential areas, flood risk, neighborhoods with very different reputations, and an economy that depends on one military base, one plant, or one industry. This video is not about saying that people cannot live in these towns, because they have families, schools, jobs, neighbors, and people who truly love their city. But if you are moving to Texas from another state and only looking at the price of a house, you can miss the problems that locals have already learned to notice. Today, we are looking at 6 Texas towns that may seem affordable, but need very careful research before you move there. Watch until the end, because the number one place is connected not only to cheap housing, but also to industrial history, hurricane risk, and one of the most famous disasters in American history. Let's begin. Wichita Falls is located in North Texas, not far from the Oklahoma border, and at first glance, it can look like the kind of place many people imagine when they think about a more affordable move to Texas. There are wide roads, ordinary residential neighborhoods, older districts, homes that cost less than in the major metro areas, Shepherd Air Force Base nearby, a local university atmosphere, parks, and a slower pace that can feel appealing to someone who is tired of big cities. That is why Wichita Falls should not be written off as a bad place right away. It has its own economic base, its own history, its own infrastructure, and people who have lived there for years, because the simpler rhythm, the lower level of congestion, and the chance to have more space for less money fit their lives. The problem begins when someone looks at the city only through the price of real estate and never asks the more important question: why does housing here cost noticeably less than in the faster-growing parts of Texas? One answer is distance. Wichita Falls is far from the state's main economic centers, and that distance feels stronger in real life than it does on a map. Dallas-Fort Worth is several hours away, while Austin and Houston are even farther, which means that a person who expects quick access to a large job market, major medical centers, international airports, large companies, and the constant movement of a bigger economy may realize that Wichita Falls operates at a very different pace. Here, affordability can be connected not only to lower prices, but also to limited growth. The city has jobs, services, schools, a military presence, and basic infrastructure, but it is not the kind of market where new opportunities appear on every corner. If someone has a remote job, a stable retirement income, a military connection, or a clear local position, Wichita Falls may work well. But if the move is built on the hope that a cheap house will automatically turn into a better life, the city requires a much more careful look. There is another factor that many newcomers underestimate: the climate and the feeling of the environment. North Texas can be harsh in its own way, because there is heat, wind, dryness, sudden weather changes, and long periods when the city can feel much less inviting than it does in a good real estate photo. For locals, this is part of normal life. But for someone choosing a town based on the price of a house and a few nice images, that everyday reality can come as a surprise. From the outside, Wichita Falls can look like a reasonable compromise. Not too big, not too expensive, not too crowded, and with enough basic infrastructure to make daily life possible. But in places like this, it is important to check not only the cost of housing, but the entire life scenario: where you will work, how long your drives will be, which neighborhoods fit your family, where the schools are, how easy it is to find a doctor, what the city looks like in the evening, what is happening to businesses downtown, and whether the distance from the rest of Texas actually fits your life. Wichita Falls opens this list not because it is the hardest city in Texas, but because it shows the first trap of a cheap move very clearly. Sometimes, a low price does not mean that you have found a hidden gem. Sometimes, it means that the city needs to be studied much more carefully than it seems from a house photo, a wide sky, and a quiet street. Number 5. Killeen is located in central Texas, near Fort Cavazos, between Austin and Waco. On a map, it can look like an ordinary Texas city where housing costs less than in the major metro areas. The roads are wide, there are many residential neighborhoods, and a large military base nearby keeps a steady flow of people, jobs, rentals, services, stores, and housing demand in the area. At first glance, that can seem like a strong advantage because a large military base usually brings a stable flow of residents, jobs, and money into a city. Around a base like that, you often find schools, restaurants, repair services, medical offices, rental housing, and businesses that serve service members, their families, and people who work nearby. But Killeen has its own reality. A large part of city life is connected not to long-term settled living, but to frequent moves, temporary contracts, rentals, and people who come here for a few years because their service or work brought them to the area. Because of that, Killeen can feel very different depending on the neighborhood. In one area, a person may see calm homes, military families, ordinary stores, and a lifestyle that looks convenient for the price. In another area, they may find a larger amount of rental housing, homes that wear down faster, streets where neighbors change often, and a general feeling that people do not always stay for long. For someone looking at Killeen from another state, a low house price can look like a chance to buy property in Central Texas quickly. But before buying, it is important to understand which areas are more connected to rentals, where the better schools are, which streets locals suggest checking more carefully, how far the drive to work will be, how easy it is to find stable employment outside the military base, and what happens to your life plan if you are not directly connected to Fort Cavazos. Killeen can also attract people who want to buy a home for less than they would pay in Austin, Round Rock, Georgetown, or other fast-growing cities in Central Texas. But a lower price by itself does not make the city a strong growth opportunity, because Killeen does not become Austin just because it is located in the same part of the state. It has a different economy, a different rhythm, a different group of residents, and a different housing market. The main question here is not whether people can live in Killeen. Of course they can. Tens of thousands of people live there, families work there, children go to school there, service members build their daily lives there, local businesses serve the large base, and many residents are comfortable with the city because they understand how it works. But for a newcomer, the problem begins when they buy a house expecting a normal, quiet suburb and then discover a city with constant movement, neighborhoods with different reputations, a large rental market, and a strong dependence on the military base. Killeen is number 5 because it is a city where a low price can look logical and attractive until a person understands what is behind that price. Here, it is important to look not only at the house, the square footage, and the mortgage payment, but also at the neighborhood, schools, rentals, jobs, the nearby base, the frequency of moves, and whether your life actually fits a city where so much is connected to Fort Cavazos.
Lubbock is located in West Texas, on the South Plains, and at first glance, it can look like a more practical alternative to the expensive parts of the state. It has Texas Tech University, medical facilities, shopping centers, wide roads, ordinary residential neighborhoods, homes that cost less than in Austin, Dallas, or popular suburbs, and the city is large enough that it does not feel completely disconnected from everyday life. But Lubbock needs to be judged not only by the price of a house or the presence of a university, because life here is very different from the picture many people have in mind when they think about moving to Texas. This is not a green suburb next to a major job market, not a city by the water, and not a place surrounded by several large metro areas. Lubbock sits far out on the plains, and that distance is felt in daily life much more than it may seem on a map. The main factor here is isolation.
Dallas-Fort Worth is several hours away, while Austin and Houston are even farther, which means that someone expecting quick access to major companies, large airports, different job markets, and the constant movement of a bigger economy may quickly realize that Lubbock operates in its own separate rhythm. The city has jobs, healthcare, education, services, and a college town atmosphere, but it is still a regional center, not part of a large metro area where new opportunities appear through a constant flow of companies and people. The climate is another thing many newcomers underestimate. Lubbock is connected to wind, dryness, heat, sudden weather changes, dust, and open space, where the plains can look beautiful one day and feel very harsh the next. For locals, this is a normal part of life in West Texas, but for someone choosing the city based on a house price, a university, and a few sunny photos, that environment can come as a surprise. Lubbock can also look affordable because there really are homes here that cost less than in the faster-growing parts of Texas. But the price alone does not tell you whether the city fits a long-term life. Before buying, you need to look at which neighborhood the house is in, how far the drive to work or school will be, which schools are available, what happens in the evening, how much the area depends on students or renters, what the street looks like not only during the day but also after sunset, and whether life in a city far from most of the state's major centers actually fits you. At the same time, Lubbock should not be described only through its downsides. The city has a university, hospitals, jobs, local businesses, sports culture, ordinary families, neighborhoods where people live calmly for years, and residents who like the direct, simpler rhythm of West Texas.
For students, people connected to Texas Tech, healthcare, education, agriculture, services, or regional business, Lubbock can be a conscious and reasonable choice. The problem begins when someone looks at Lubbock only as a cheap entry point into Texas. They see a house that costs less than in Austin or Dallas, wide roads, a large city on the map, and they may think they have found a calm place with a good price. But after moving, they may realize that affordable housing also comes with distance, a dry climate, dust, wind, a more limited range of job options, neighborhoods with different reputations, and a daily reality that feels very different from life in more popular parts of the state. Lubbock is number 4 because it is a city where a low price can look reasonable and attractive until a person understands whether West Texas itself actually fits them. Here, it is important to look not only at the cost of a house and the size of the city, but also at distance, climate, work, neighborhood, schools, safety, rentals, the student environment, and whether you are ready to live in a place that can be convenient for some people, but too dry, too far, and too harsh for others.
Number 3, Beaumont, is located in southeast Texas, not far from the Louisiana border, and on a map, it can look like a convenient city for someone thinking about moving. Houston is not too far away. The Gulf Coast is nearby. There are roads, industry, working-class neighborhoods, and housing that often costs less than in more popular parts of the state. But Beaumont cannot be judged only by its distance from Houston or by the price of a house, because lower housing costs here often come with an industrial setting, hurricane risk, humid weather, aging infrastructure, and neighborhoods that need to be checked carefully. Historically, Beaumont is closely tied to the oil history of Texas. After the discovery of Spindletop, this area became one of the important centers of Texas oil growth, and since then refining, transportation, chemical plants, industrial work zones, and a working economy have become part of local life. For people who were born in the region, this may feel normal. But for a newcomer who chooses a house based on price and photos, the industrial background can come as a surprise because it affects the roads, the air, the look of the city, the closeness of plants, and the general feeling of the neighborhood. Beaumont can look affordable because there really are homes here with prices that may seem attractive compared to Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, or some suburbs of Houston. But the price alone does not tell you whether the city fits your life. Before buying, you need to look at exactly where the house is located, what the neighborhood looks like in the evening, how close the industrial areas are, which schools are available, how long it takes to get to work, how the city handles heavy rain, and what happens to the streets after a storm. The weather matters here too. Southeast Texas is connected to hurricanes, heavy rain, humidity, flooding, and Gulf Coast risks. So a house may be cheap not because it is a rare find, but because it has a history with water, insurance, repairs, the neighborhood, or infrastructure that you cannot see in a nice photo of the front of the house. At the same time, Beaumont should not be described only through its problems. The city has a university, hospitals, jobs, historic neighborhoods, ordinary families, local businesses, and people who build stable lives here. But for a newcomer, it is important to understand that the city may feel heavier than it looked in the listing if the neighborhood, work, roads, insurance, schools, safety, and closeness to industry are not checked in advance. For someone moving from another state, Beaumont may seem like a reasonable compromise. Not as expensive as the big cities, not as remote as the smaller inland towns, and not as empty as places with almost no economy. But that compromise comes with a price because, along with affordable housing, a person also gets humid weather, hurricane seasons, an industrial background, aging infrastructure, and neighborhoods that can be very different from one another. Beaumont is number 3 because it is a city where cheap housing needs to be understood together with the full local context. Here, it is important to check not only the cost of the house, but also the industry, the weather, the neighborhood, insurance, roads, schools, work, crime statistics, and the opinion of people who have lived there not for 1 month, but for many years. In a city like this, a low price can be an opportunity only for someone who understands in advance what they are agreeing to. Number 2, Port Arthur is located in southeast Texas, near Sabine Lake and the Louisiana border. On a map, it can look like a city with clear advantages: water nearby, a port, oil refining, roads, industrial employers, and housing that often costs noticeably less than in the cities where people from other states usually move. But Port Arthur cannot be judged only by the price of a house, because the low cost of housing here is not simply the result of the city being overlooked. Prices can be affected by the industrial setting, hurricanes, flood risk, aging infrastructure, population decline, income levels, and neighborhoods where everyday life can be more complicated than it looks in real estate photos. The main thing to understand about Port Arthur is that industry sits very close to ordinary city life. Refineries, port zones, pipes, flares, freight routes, rail lines, and working areas do not feel like something far outside the city, because they have long been part of the local landscape and economy. For some residents, this is work and normal daily life, while for others, it is one reason the city can feel heavy, especially if someone moves here expecting a quiet coastal version of Texas. From the outside, Port Arthur can seem attractive because it has water, warm weather, affordable homes, and access to the Gulf Coast. But being close to the water means not only views and fishing, but also hurricanes, flooding, insurance questions, repairs after storms, humidity, heat, and neighborhoods where every strong season can test homes, roads, and family budgets. If someone looks at Port Arthur from another state, they may see a house that costs much less than a similar home in popular suburbs of Dallas or Austin, and they may think they have found a rare chance to buy property in Texas with less competition. But in a city like this, a low price requires additional questions. Why has the house been on the market for so long? How did the neighborhood handle past hurricanes? What will insurance cost? How close is the industrial zone? What does the street look like in the evening? Where are the schools? How far is normal work? And how easy will it be to sell the house if the move does not work out? Port Arthur also shows that a cheap move does not always mean a city has no life. People work here, go to church, raise children, stay connected to their neighborhoods, help neighbors after storms, and know their city much better than any ranking can explain. But that is exactly why a newcomer needs to look more carefully, because someone from outside may see only the price and miss the things locals have been considering for years. For people connected to industry, the port, energy, logistics, or local employers, Port Arthur can make sense because the work and the environment match. But if someone comes here only for a cheap house without understanding the local economy, weather, environmental concerns, insurance, and the condition of different neighborhoods, they may quickly realize that the low price was only the beginning of a more complicated decision. Port Arthur is number 2 because this is a city where affordable housing cannot be separated from industry, hurricane risk, and long-term economic pressure. Here, you need to look not only at the photo of the house, but at the neighborhood, the history of the property, flood maps, insurance, work, roads, air quality, schools, and the way residents themselves explain the strengths and weak points of their city. Port Arthur can be a working city, a coastal city, and a place where strong families live. But for a newcomer, it should not be an impulsive purchase based only on a beautiful price. Number 1 Texas City is located on the Gulf Coast near Galveston Bay. The port, petrochemical plants, industrial zones, major roads, and water. On a map, it can look like a practical place to live. Houston is not far away. Galveston is nearby. There are industrial employers. There is a port, and there are homes that cost less than in many popular suburbs. A person who looks only at real estate prices might think they have found an underrated city near a major market. But Texas City is number one, not because it is the cheapest city in Texas, and not because it is impossible to live there. It is on this list because several things that should be checked before moving all come together in one place: industry, near residential areas, a port-based economy, hurricane risk, proximity to the water, insurance, neighborhoods with different reputations, dependence on major employers, and the history of a disaster that is still connected to this city. In 1947, one of the most famous industrial disasters in American history happened at the port of Texas City. An explosion on the French ship Grand Camp, which was docked in the port with a cargo of ammonium nitrate, destroyed part of the city, caused fires, and killed hundreds of people. For a modern resident, this does not mean that the city lives every day waiting for another tragedy, but it does help explain why industry here is not just a distant piece of history, but part of the city's reputation. Today, Texas City is still a working industrial city. For some people, that can be an advantage because there are plants, a port, energy jobs, logistics, technical trades, and the chance to live closer to work. But for a newcomer who chooses the city only because of the price of a house and its closeness to the water, it is important to understand that an industrial area near residential neighborhoods means not only jobs, but also freight traffic, noise, smells, flares, industrial views, environmental concerns, and a city rhythm that is more connected to production than to a quiet coastal lifestyle. The Gulf Coast also has to be considered separately. Being close to the water can look beautiful in a photo, but in real life, it comes with hurricane seasons, storm risk, flooding, insurance, repairs, evacuation routes, and houses where past damage may matter more than fresh paint on the front. In cities like this, you have to look not only at the price and the floor plan, but also at flood maps, the condition of the roof, the elevation of the lot, drainage, insurance costs, the neighborhood, and how the street handled previous storms. That is why Texas City can be a risky purchase for someone who is simply looking for a cheap house near the water. From the outside, it can all look logical. The city is not too far from Houston. Galveston is nearby. There are jobs, roads, a port, and housing that costs less than in popular suburbs. But after moving, a person may realize that the lower price is connected to things locals have been considering for years: industry, weather, insurance, infrastructure, neighborhoods, safety, air quality, and the city's dependence on large employers. At the same time, Texas City should not be described only through fear or a bad reputation. Families live there. People work there. There are schools, churches, local businesses, normal streets, yards, neighbors, and residents who see the city as home because they understand both its advantages and its weak points. But that is exactly why a newcomer should not make a quick decision, because the city may work well for someone who grew up in a similar environment or works in industry, while it may feel difficult for someone who expects a quiet, coastal suburb. Texas can truly be a state of opportunity because it has jobs, land, space, different kinds of cities, and neighborhoods where people find exactly the kind of life they were looking for. But the main mistake many people make when they move here is that they look at Texas as one big idea, while in reality, every city here lives in its own way with its own economy, weather, history, neighborhoods, and problems. Wichita Falls shows that a calm and affordable city can also come with distance, climate, and limited growth. Killeen reminds us that cheap housing near a military base has to be understood together with rentals, frequent moves, and a constant turnover of people. Odessa shows why having work in an oil town does not always mean having a calm life. Beaumont and Port Arthur show that Southeast Texas cannot be separated from industry, humidity, hurricanes, insurance, and the condition of local neighborhoods. And Texas City is number one because the price of a house there is connected not only to the real estate market, but also to the port, petrochemical industry, the Gulf Coast, storm risks, and the city's history. This does not mean that people cannot move to these cities. Families live there. People work there. There are schools, churches, neighbors, local businesses, and residents who truly see these places as home. But when someone comes from outside and looks only at a low price, a large lot, and a nice photo taken on a sunny day, they can easily miss the things locals already consider part of everyday life. Before moving to any cheap town in Texas, it is worth asking not only how much does the house cost, but also why does it cost that much? Where do locals work? Which neighborhoods should be checked more carefully? How does the city handle bad weather? How much will insurance cost? What happens there in the evening? How far away are medical care and stable jobs? And how easy will it be to sell the house if the move turns out to be a mistake? If you live in Texas, or if you know a city that looks affordable but needs to be researched very carefully before moving, write it in the comments. Maybe it will be included in the next episode. Subscribe to Texas Unseen if you want to see Texas not only through beautiful roads, ranches, and real estate photos, but through the places where a low price, an empty street, an old plant, or an ordinary house can hide a story that newcomers may notice too late. We are just getting started.